Welcome to another Donna Downey Studios Artist Gang Tuesday. I'm Andrea Walford from AndreaWalfordDesigns.com, and today I'm going to show you how I created this Trust the Timing art journal page. So I'm working in my Large Delusions art journal, and I've gone ahead and applied gesso to my page. Now generally before I start any of my art journal pages, I like to apply 2 layers of my golden gesso, and I just make sure each layer is thoroughly dry before I apply the next one. Now I'm starting off here by applying my Kaisercraft Timeless Fob Watch rub-ons to the top half of my page, and I'm just using a popsicle stick and alternating the direction of the images as I apply them. So once I had finished applying my rub-ons, I started adding some color to the top half of my page, and I chose 2 of my absolute favorite golden fluid acrylics, the quinacridone magenta and then the Indian yellow hue. Now I just applied drips of them directly to the page and then started blending each of the colors out with my fingers and then bringing it in towards the middle of where I had applied them to get a nice blend of the 2 colors. So once I had applied my first layer of colors while the paint was still wet, I then took some gesso in each of those colors and just put them on a scrap piece of paper that I had sitting on my desk, and then alternately dipped my finger in the gesso and one or the other of the colors. I added a little bit of that mixture towards the top of the page, but then I really used it to kind of fill in the bottom of the page and pull the color down because I didn't know how much of that bottom area I was going to be covering up later. Now I then made sure that that layer was completely dry and then put a little bit of my golden teal and phthalo turquoise paint onto a piece of scrap paper that I had beside me, and then just grabbed an old hotel room key card and dipped it in the 2 colors and just started pulling that downwards along my page. So once that layer was completely dry, I then took some gesso and some quinacridone magenta and applied it through the Donna Downey Stencil Grunge Halftone dots. And I used a cosmetic sponge and then just applied it selectively in random areas along the top of my page and just moved my stencil as needed. Now I then took my carbon black golden fluid acrylic and a 1-inch wide flat Simply Simmons paintbrush and started painting about the bottom third of my page. Now after I finished applying my paint along the bottom, I made sure it was completely dry, and then I grabbed my Count Downey stencil and my cosmetic sponge and started sponging some of that carbon black fluid acrylic paint through the patterned area of the stencil, because if you look at the stencil you'll notice that the bottom half of the stencil is just this large solid black rectangle, and I had painted that in with my paintbrush rather than applying it through the stencil, and then just use my cosmetic sponge to apply the patterned area to overlap that black solid area that I'd painted, and I just moved the stencil around to get that patterned area looking the way I wanted it to. Now, I love applying imagery to my pages, but I don't always want to take the time to draw my images by hand. So I found this clip art of an old vintage clock on depositphotos.com, and I purchased it in a JPEG format. And then I sized it to the finished size that I wanted using my Photoshop software, and then printed it out onto a luster photo paper using my Epson Artisan 1430 printer. Once I had done that, I then took my scissors and I cut very closely around the image, so as close to the border as I could possibly get. Now after I cut out my clock, I set it aside and then mixed up some gray paint using some of my carbon black and zinc white fluid acrylics. I then applied it with a brush and my fingers along the bottom portion of the page because I wanted to create the illusion of a surface that the clock would be sitting on. So now once that bottom area was dry, I then took some of my golden soft gel matte medium and applied it to the back of my clock using a paintbrush, and then decided to put my clock along the bottom left of my page. Now I did brush a layer of that soft gel matte over top just to seal the image. And then I used a little round brush and just applied some of that gray paint around the left and right bottom edges of the clock, just to try to blend it into the background a little bit more. So now at this point I wanted to start adding some paint over top of my clock because I wanted it to look painterly and a part of the page rather than something that was just cut out and stuck onto the page. So I mixed together some of my Liquitex Basics silver paint with some of my golden acrylic glazing liquid satin just to thin it out a little bit, and then mixed in a little bit of that gray paint that I had created earlier and painted along the bottom. And then I just took a very fine round tip brush and started painting all around the outer perimeter of the clock, and then where there were black areas, I took some carbon black paint and just painted inside those areas as well, or over top of those areas. And then I grabbed my Feud pen and just started drawing along the perimeter of the clock and just around the outside of that inner face there. And I really just wanted to make it look like it was, hand drawn, a combination of hand drawn and hand painted. So now at this point, I grabbed my Molotow Signal White Extra Fine Tip paint pen and just started journaling along the bottom of the page. And this part is probably the most significant part for me. I don't journal on all my pages, but when I'm going through something really difficult, and right now I have a lot of different difficult circumstances converging in my life, and it's been very stressful and very emotional, and I've just really, almost felt like I'm going to implode some days. And so what I did here was essentially I was just spilling out how I was feeling. And because it's really just for me and a way to get it off my chest, I will write in kind of big, messy letters that will overlap one another so that I'm the only one who really knows what's there. Now, the real overarching theme for my page, pretty much right from the moment that I decided to create it, was trust. And the sense that everything that's going on in my life right now, as difficult as it seems, is happening for a reason. And that's why when I saw the stamp in the Donna Downey As I See It stamp set that said, "Trust the timing of your life," it really reached out and spoke to me, because it just really told me that I need to trust that what's happening in my life right now is happening for a reason, and that God's going to give me the strength to work through it. So I started by grabbing some big bold letters, and these are just some vinyl letters that I had purchased in our local office supply store. They're a 1-inch high Helvetica block letter, and I applied that to my page. I tried to draw a little border around it, but my pen wasn't working, so I left it as is and then moved on and grabbed some glaze. This is called the Fresco Cream, and it's an actual golden glaze. And then I started applying several layers over top of my clock, drying each layer in between. And the reason I did that was because I had decided, kind of after looking at my page and trying to figure out where I wanted to stamp that saying from Donna's stamp set, that I wanted it right in the center of my clock, but I didn't want it to get overwhelmed by the clock face. So I decided to mute that with the glaze, but still have it showing through. So then once all my glaze layers were dry, I stamped that sentiment right in the center of my clock using my Ranger Jet Black archival ink. So then after trying out a few different pens, I finally found one that worked in outlining my letters, and that was just a regular Sharpie pen. So now at this point I was deciding I didn't like that extra little black space underneath the word trust, so I just grabbed my paint marker and added a little extra journaling there. And then my very final step was to add back some of that detailing that I had lost when I applied my glaze using my Feud pen. So that is how I created my art journal page. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial, and I look forward to creating with you again.